How do you go full time in your creative business? How do you avoid perfection while still improving all the time? And how much time should you spend marketing versus making? These are the questions you asked me, and I'm going to answer them in today's episode. Welcome to Explore Your Enthusiasm, episode 170. I am Tara Swiger, and today I'm going to be answering the questions that you all posted on my Instagram and my Facebook page. We have a lot of questions to get into. In order to have your question answered in the next Q&A episode, make sure that you're following me on Instagram. I'm Tara Swiger there, and my Facebook page, it's Tara Swiger page, and you'll get a chance to ask your question, have it answered on the podcast. I'm going to get all the ones in that I can get done today. We'll see if it's 2 episodes or just 1, but let's dive right into it. So Nicole asks, Tara, I would love to know when you felt your business first got off the ground for real. What was it that made you think or feel like, yes, I have a real business now and people love what I bring to the table? That's a really good question. I really felt like my business got off the ground when and so to go back a little bit, my first business was a handmade yarn company. I hand dyed and hand spun eco-friendly yarn, and this started back in 2006, and I went full-time in 2009. I did a thing in January 14th to February 14th called Month of Love, where every weekday I spun a different yarn inspired by a famous couple, and I posted that yarn for sale. So it was the first time ever that I posted yarn 5 days a week. And I also let customers suggest names, and if I use their names, they got 50% off a skein of yarn. And this is before Instagram. This is before I had anything businessy on Facebook. This is, I think, 2007. It might have been 2008. The first time I did this, and then I did it again and again because it worked so well. That is the thing that got my business off the ground. Until then, I was just dyeing a few skeins here, listing a few skeins there, spinning up some, but really committing to doing it every day and listing it every day made all of the difference. I can't say that enough. Committing to my business, making and listing a new item every weekday made the difference, and that is what then got it off the ground. But really, it's not even the sales that occurred because of that kind of promo or theme. It is because I committed to it. And I say this over and over. When people really commit to making their business work and putting in the time and listing regularly and sharing their work with people, that is when they start to feel like a real business. It's not when you hit a certain number of sales, because I know people who have sales that would make you feel like a totally legitimate business, and yet they still don't feel legitimate. So you really decide when your business counts and when it counts for you. So she said, what made you think or feel like, yes, I have a real business? That was me committing that I was going to sell that yarn and I was going to make that yarn because it was a priority. And at the time I worked full time in an office job. I did not have the time to dye and spin yarn, and I did it on nights and weekends. Now, the second part of your question, your question was what was it that made you think or feel like, yes, I have a real business and people love what I bring to the table? The two things are totally separate. You can decide that you have a real business and still be full of self-doubt about if people love it or not. People can love it and you can still not realize you have a real business. A lot of people make really awesome products, but they don't have a business. They just make a good product and they sell it sometimes. So I still have doubt that people love what I bring to the table. What helps me with that is all of your guys' comments and seeing the real results in my customers and students' businesses. So honestly, it's just when somebody sees your work and they love it, that's maybe that's not the most psychologically healthy thing to base it on, but that's really what did it for me. So Little Hammer Games, and by the way, we're going to link to everybody's Instagram names in the show notes, which you'll find at taraswiger.com/podcast170. So Little Hammer Games asks, how do you draw a line between always trying to do better and make your products better and not being a perfectionist? In my head, I think I'm on the always improving side of the line, but my husband is concerned that I'm becoming too much of a perfectionist and I'm having trouble describing my goals to him. Love the podcast, by the way. Well, thank you. The question of are you just improving or are you a perfectionist really comes down to 2 questions, and we're going to get real deep real quick here. The first question is, how do you feel about you? Do you believe that you're enough or that you're always in need of perfecting? If you aren't happy no matter what your results are, and you don't think you're good enough and you don't deserve it yet, then that's a problem. So continuous improvement and continuous growth is a good thing. But when you do it from a place of personal lack and personal not believing you're enough and you don't deserve it yet, that's when it's a problem. But you can think you're amazing and your stuff is valuable and that you deserve to be paid for it, and still want to always be improving it. Only you know where you are there. Now, the second question is, is it holding you back? Or what is it keeping you from? So your continuous improvement or your perfectionism, depend on who's describing it, what is it keeping you from? If you're constantly wanting to improve is keeping you from selling it or offering it or charging enough for it, then yes, it's a problem. If you are sharing your work with people, if you're always wanting to be better isn't keeping you from doing anything that you want to be doing, then it's totally fine. Then it's just continuous improvement. But if you're not sharing it because you think it's not perfect yet, then that is a problem. So continuous improvement, always a good thing, but knowing that you're going to move forward even before it's perfect is different. So like, I think of it as a spectrum, and there's like, we're always here and we're trying to improve. But then there's like perfection up here. So I'm just trying to move along a thing to get better. I'm not trying to shoot for perfection. Like, perfection isn't even exist. So I'm just always trying to move forward and get better without needing to strive for perfection. So Yarn Garden Mill asks, would love to hear your thoughts on procrastination. Why do we do it, and how to be better about staying on task when you're the boss? Why do we do it? There are a million reasons you might procrastinate. You might be procrastinating out of fear. You might be procrastinating out of you just don't want to do the thing because it's unpleasant. You might be procrastinating because you really doubt yourself and you doubt the outcome, so you think it's not going to work out. So then you think, well, what's the point of doing the work if it's not going to work out? You might procrastinate because it's not a priority and something else is a priority. So how to deal with it is, number one, prioritize. List everything that's in your head that you're not doing, that you're procrastinating on, and prioritize. The things that aren't in your top 2 or 3 priorities, mark off your list for the day. Maybe mark off your list for every day. Like, maybe you just don't need to do it. That's a huge part of stopping procrastination, is just letting go of the things you don't need to do. If you've been telling yourself you need to learn Pinterest for the past year, but you just really don't want to learn Pinterest, and it's not nearly as high of a priority as making your product and listing your product and talking to your customers and sending emails, then just like take it off your list. So like, I have increased traffic from Pinterest just totally off my list. I also have like learned to read my stats better, just totally off my list. Like, there are so many things that other business owners think they have to learn to do that I've just taken off my list, and it gives me more time and energy and mental space to focus on the things that are really priorities. So prioritize, and then ask yourself, why am I not doing this? If it's something that you just don't want to do because you think it's hard or because you have a lot of self-doubt about it, then set a 20-minute timer and work on it for 20 minutes and just do it. I mean, there is no answer other than doing it, but setting a timer and letting yourself be done with it after the 20 minutes. Make a promise to yourself, I'll stop after 20 minutes no matter how I feel, and then do. And if you do that regularly, you'll start to trust that you really will stop after 20 minutes, and that means anything you can do for 20 minutes. I do this when I go running, right? I only have to run for 5 minutes and then I'll stop. Now, usually by then I'm far from my house, so I have to keep going, but, well, not far in 5 minutes, but I'm away from my house, so I at least have to come back. But don't tell yourself you have to do something for 3 hours, because you'll always put it off and you'll always think you don't have 3 hours. So VT Sheepskins, which I'm guessing is Vermont Sheepskins, asks, have you ever asked the Starship members how much of their time they spend on marketing versus production? I know there is no one size right amount of time, but I wonder what the percentage would be for small craft businesses that are successfully/steadily selling their products. I did ask the Starship after I got your question, and the answer is 50-50. So I asked them this question: how much time do you spend making the product, which is production, versus all of the time selling the product? Because this is the important thing to realize. Marketing isn't just being on Instagram and sending emails and It's also writing descriptions for your Etsy shop. It's also going to craft fairs and craft markets and standing there and selling your work. Anything you do that communicates with a potential buyer is marketing. So really, I look at it as split between making your work versus selling your work. Because when you're on Instagram connecting with potential customers, or you're writing emails to send out, that's not just extra fun stuff. That's the only way you sell your work. So I asked the Starship Captains, and right now 50-50 is what's winning out. So they spend 50% of their time making and 50% of their time selling. Now that's of the time that's only spent making and selling. There's another group of time that's admin stuff or stuff not related to making and selling. So is 50-50 is the most popular answer. The second most popular answers, with a couple fewer replies, was 90% of the time production and 10% of the time selling. But this is really going to depend on the product that you make. So a hand spun skein of yarn took me 1 hour to spin, but it also took hours in the dyeing pot, and then also hours drying, the wool drying, and then an hour for me to spin. So my production calendar was 3 skeins a day. So that's 3 hours of making a day, and that's really all my wrist could do. So then the other part of the time was spent selling the work, or doing the other admin kind of stuff that had to be done, like applying to craft shows and answering emails and stuff like that. So if you have a product that makes up really quickly, you probably make a lot more of them because they're probably lower priced. If you have a product that's like an art quilt, like Marsha who's watching, that takes way longer to make one piece. So you might have a longer making time, but a shorter selling time, because maybe you put it on a few shows, or it's a custom piece and you've already sold it, and then you actually make it. So it really depends on your product. So Sweet Pea and Co. says, I have 2 questions. First, scaling up. What's the best way to navigate the growing pains, and is there such thing as too big? This is too broad of a question for me to answer. The best way to navigate the growing pains is to pay attention, be constantly reassessing, and figure out what it is that you're going for and what it is that you want and why you're scaling up. And then, like, there is no one size fits all answer other than regularly review what you've done, what works, what's not working, and then shift things. That's all business is forever. Reassessing, changing it up, moving forward, reassessing, making changes, reassessing. So is there such a thing as too big? It's up to you. What are your goals? What do you want to do? Let me think of a small company that's rather big. Is not even a small company. Is Coca-Cola too big of a company? Well, they don't think so. Is it too big of a company for me to run? Yeah, probably. So there's no such thing as too big. It's entirely up to what you want to do. Do you want to have 5 employees, or do you want to have no employees? That's entirely up to you. There is no too big. Her second question, how to transition to full-time. Again, this is a pretty big question. So I want you to think about it like this. First, you need to do your numbers. What do you need in order to live? What is all the money you need to make in order to live? Now, that is not necessarily what are you spending each month, because maybe you're spending way more than you need to live, which is fine and cool. But what do you really need to live? And then break that down into products. So to back up, you need to know your profit margin on each product, and then you need to break down what you want to live into how many products with that profit margin. And then you got to do that for all your products. We actually walk you through knowing all of these numbers and doing your math in the class Pay Yourself. I don't know why I said we walk you through. I walk you through. And you'll find it at taraswiger.com/pay. It's a 6-week class that walks you through all of this math. So you need to know what you'd have to sell at your current profit in order to be able to pay your bills. And then you have to figure out, how do you scale up that production and then scale up the sales while you're doing it on nights and weekends? Or can you work part-time? Can you get a different job with only part-time hours? You have to work out that transition. So if you need, let's say you live in East Tennessee and you only need $2,000 to $3,000 a month to live, then and you're currently selling $1,000 a month, but you know you could actually be making a little more product and be spending more time marketing, then start doing that now and see if you can get to that $2,000 to $3,000 a month in profit of number. And if not, maybe you need to scale back your hours at work. Maybe you need to get a different part-time job. And that's what I would do. Always be looking at the numbers. Be sure you're looking at your profit after you take out taxes, and then be doing more production and more sales as you scale down your outside of or your more traditional work. Because lots of people still have part-time jobs while they do their creative businesses because they want to get out of the house, because they like the steady income, because they just want to. So that's how I think about transitioning to full-time. You have to know your numbers, and pay yourself helps you realize all of your business numbers. And by the way, when you do that math, you might figure out that maybe you have to sell 1,000 of what you make, and there's no physical way for you to make 1,000 of what you make. So maybe it doesn't work. And I definitely have people take the class who realize that their current numbers don't work. Better for you to know that than for you to quit your job and realize, oh crap, there's no way to make this work. So that's why knowing your numbers are so important, so you actually know what you're doing and know what you're moving forward with. So Quanda Candles says, in a one-woman creative business, am I wasting time making every single item myself? I've used casual employees, but only in busy times. I feel like I have no other time for my social media, website, blog, kids, and then she also asked about pricing, which we'll talk about in a minute. I have no idea if you're wasting your time making your products. It depends on how long your products take and how effective you are at making them. So I think your question is, you as the CEO and the creator of the business, is your time best spent making or selling? But before we get to that, the better question is, are you making as effectively as you could be making? Are you streamlining your production process so that it's as streamlined as possible? Because before you push it off on anybody else, you need to make it as streamlined as possible. Actually, Stacy Trock just taught a class on this for Creative Live. I recommend you go to Creative Live and watch her class on outsourcing, on getting other people to do different parts of your business, whether it's a VA who handles your emails, or somebody who comes in and handles your shipping, or actually somebody who makes your product for you. It's really going to depend on what your product is, how specialized the skill is, how much you can streamline production. So if you were a painter, and you painted canvases, obviously you wouldn't be wasting your time making every single item yourself. But if you were, what's an example of something that can be, if you crochet hats and you work from a pattern that you've written, it's possible you could pay other people to crochet those hats while you work on selling and marketing. And you could just be the designer. For example, a lot of knitwear designers hire knitters to actually knit up their designs. Other knitwear designers have to do the knitting themselves to see how it turns out. That's completely up to you and your process. But that's a good question to ask yourself. Am I doing this as streamlined as possible? And would it actually be less expensive overall for me to hire this out? Now, feeling like you have no other time for everything else, you need to look at your numbers. So you need to look, are you charging enough for the amount of time that it takes you to make your product? Are you making your product in an as effective way as possible so you can make as many? And then are you, marketing it effectively, or are you spending the time that you're on Instagram just scrolling through Instagram? So time management is actually a whole combination of those things, of making sure your pricing is right, and you know how much time it takes to do the things you need to do, and that time has boundaries, that certain times are set aside for working on certain things. Now, she also asked about pricing, and she says, what's too much and what's too cheap? It really depends. My answer to everything is it depends, right? A Picasso painting, is any price that you put on it going to be too much? Or a cheap plastic barrette that I buy at the dollar store, can it really ever be too cheap? So really, the difference between those two things is not actually just the materials and the time taken to make them, it's the value behind them. It's can I see that a real person made this and that it has a real impact? So the question is not what's too cheap and what's too expensive, because the answer is like infinity, right? It could be anything if you've properly communicated the value of that thing, and if it's of a high enough quality that somebody can see the value in it. So I actually have a podcast episode I'll be sure to link to in the show notes about value and how you express the value of your thing. And we go into this in the pricing class. And the pricing class actually comes as a part of Pay Yourself, which I talked about earlier. So Pay Yourself walks you through knowing your numbers, seeing your profit margins, your individual profit margins on each thing, and then figuring out how much money you want to make and how many products you need to sell in order to make that much money. And then it comes with a Pricing 101 class. In Pricing 101, you learn 3 formulas for pricing based on, you pick the formula that you're going to use for your business based on, do you have a time-intensive or a material-intensive product? So that all comes in one class, the Pay Yourself and the Pricing 101. And again, you can find it at taraswiger.com/pay. I'll link to it in the show notes. I'll also link to that podcast about value. Beverly England asks, what should be the top 5 goals small business owners need to meet? So if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you probably know that my answer is going to be, it's up to you. What 5 goals do you want to meet? If I had to give you some, I would say that your top goal should be to create the kind of day and the kind of company that you want to run and be a part of. What does that look like for you? Does that look like working 30 hours a day? Not 30 hours a day, 30 hours a week? Does that look like working 10 hours a week? Does that look like working only Mondays and Tuesdays? Does that look like working nights and weekends while you keep your job that you really love? What does that look like for you? So your first goal is to figure out what it is you want from your life and thus your business. Then your second goal is to figure out what you need in order to create that. What kind of price points, what kind of products, what kind of day do you need in order to create that? And then another goal should be to identify who you're going to serve with your products at your price point. And then communicate with them, build a community with them, connect with them in all the ways that you can so that you continue to serve them. That's going to get you where you want to go. But I think there's a lot of misunderstanding that people think that your goal of your small business should be to quit your day job. Not if you don't want to, not if you love your job, or that your goal of your small business should be to make a certain amount of money. Not if you don't need to or you don't care to, or your goal should be to have X profit margin. No, every business has a different profit margin. You get to decide what your goals are, and you get to define what success is for yourself. And it's not just that you get to, it's that you have to. No one else can do it for you. When you read a post or listen to a podcast or watch a class where they define for you what you should be building, they're wrong. Only you can do that. They can't come and make you do that. There is no small business police, except for the IRS, who are going to make you build something you don't want to build, or are going to make you create something you don't want to create. So at any point when you're not building what you actually want to be working in, it's your fault. And also it's your right to change it at any point. It's your privilege to get to create or not create what you want to do. So I hope that helps. Michelle says, what made you decide to start your own business and how did you actually do it? So I talk more about this in the very episode 1 of Explore Your Enthusiasm. You should be able to find it on iTunes. It wasn't on YouTube, but you can definitely find it at my website, taraswiger.com/podcast1. So long ago, 3 years ago. I talk about my own business journey in that. What made me decide to start my own business was I was a French lit major managing a paint your own pottery studio. This is back in 2004 and 2005. And newly graduated French lit major, managing a paint your own pottery studio. I looked around and realized the owner of this studio lived 2 hours away. He was not involved at all. I did all the profit and loss, all the hiring and firing, all the training, all the ordering, inventory, everything, and customer service, marketing. I realized he has a very profitable business. He's not involved at all, and he's not any smarter than I am. And part of this is youthful arrogance, but I realized that if I ever wanted to be paid what my smarts and skills and what I just deserved to be paid. It was not going to be working for someone else. And so if this guy could start a business, I could start a business. Around 2006, I met a yarn shop owner who started a yarn shop in a kind of inside farmer's market in downtown Dayton from her own yarn stash after her divorce. She didn't have a job. She needed to make money. So she got a booth at this farmer's market. I think you just paid weekly. And she started selling. She had very fancy yarn, and she had been like a costume designer. So she had the whole vibe and the yarn. And when I asked her how she started her business, and I realized she wasn't any smarter than me, and she didn't have any resources I didn't have. She just started with what she had. That's when I was like, okay, the two experiences with small business owners. And actually in college, I had worked at a scrapbooking store, which is one of the biggest in the Southeast. I realized, and that owner was like, no, it's so easy to start a business. So I had a lot of experiences with small business owners that made me think, these people, if they can do it, I can do it. And they were all very lovely people. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to get to know them. But there definitely wasn't anything like special, or like I thought people who started businesses like had money, right? Like they started with money. And I did not start with money. So it just kind of hadn't occurred to me that I could do it. All the business majors at my college, like their parents all had money. They went to school in like ties, and I was rolling up in my hoodies and jeans. So I just didn't think of myself as a person who could open a business until I met these people who had done it. And this was pre the internet being a thing that we all looked at 24/7. So I wasn't seeing other examples of businesses. I feel like nowadays there's so many examples of businesses that are starting business, of people who are starting businesses, that I can't imagine feeling like that now, but that's how I felt then. So that's what made me decide. I realized that I wanted to be independent. I didn't want to have to go to a job. I didn't want to have to hand over the money I made to someone else, which is what I had to do at the pottery studio. And I really just wanted independence and not to ever have to wear heels if I didn't want to. So how I actually did it, I describe in episode 1. I started that yarn shop owner. I started by dyeing some of her undyed yarn, and then I started dyeing some more yarn, and then I started spinning some yarn, and I listed it on Etsy like a year later. I sold some yarn to her. That was my first customer, and I used that money to buy more dyes and buy more yarn. Started selling on Etsy. It didn't get serious until I did the month of love, which I decided to sell a skein make and list a skein every weekday. That got me my first kind of regular sales, like more than just one sale every 2 months. I started to get like a sale a week. And so I kept up that schedule. This is something I didn't say. After the month of love was done, I kept up the schedule of posting a new yarn every day. So I would make several skeins of yarns over the weekends and at night, and then I would photograph them all, and then every weekday I would have a new yarn to post on Etsy, and then I would share it on Flickr, and I would share it on Twitter, and that was my marketing. And then I would go into the Knitty forums, and I would talk to people there and answer people's questions who were asking questions about knitting with hand spun yarn, and then people would follow me on Twitter or Flickr, and then they would see my yarn, which linked to my Etsy shop. So that was how I did it. And then I just kept scaling up from there. So Marcia asks, hi, I just accepted a full-time teaching job at a nursing school. Congratulations, Marcia. So I'm going to need help doing art after hours again. And she says she feels like she's in a better spot. That's fabulous. So any tips on full-time job and making? My best tip is know what you need to do in order to reach your goal. So I know, Marcia, you have a goal of putting a quilt in a show or submitting it to a juried show. So break that quilt down into the steps that need to be taken and put them on your schedule. Don't work every night and weekend. Like, don't work all the hours you're not at your job, or else it won't be fun. Have nights off. Have some weekend days off. Or maybe you sew for 3 hours on a Saturday and the rest of the day is not a working on your art day. The main thing is to remember that you're doing your art because you want to. So don't make it like a job and a slog. break it down into steps, put those steps on your calendar with plenty of time off around it. The number one thing I see that people mess up with their business and full-time juggling is that it's 24/7. That not just are they thinking about their business, but they're stressing about their business 24/7. If you have a plan and you have chunks when you're not working in that chunk of time, leave it alone. Do not stay on your Facebook or by reading lots of business stuff or by stressing out. You can do that when it's fun and you're excited, but don't do it when you are feeling horrible about it. Embroidery It, that must be your Instagram name, says, "Hi Tara, my question is a curiosity question and I'm just wondering what is next for Explore Your Enthusiasm. Do you have anything coming down the pipeline that you're ready to share with us? Thank you for all you do for all of us." Oh, well, thanks, Embroidery. I don't really ever think about the future of Explore Your Enthusiasm. I more think about the projects I'm working on, and then I incorporate the podcast into them. So for example, it's funny that so many of you guys asked about pricing and profitability and going full time and knowing your numbers, because I am about to pay yourself in the sense of re-offer it kind of live. The videos are pre-recorded, but I'll be doing live Q&As, and the Starship will all be going through it live at the same time, and I'll invite all of you guys to go through it. For example, if you join Pay Yourself, which I hadn't actually planned on telling you guys, but if you join Pay Yourself now or in September, you're going to get access to a live Q&A probably in September, mid to late September, where I answer all of your questions as you're going through it. So Pay Yourself is a class. It's pre-recorded. You get a new lesson every week, and followed up by Pricing 101. You get access to Pricing 101. And sometime, if you start now, it'll be towards the end of you taking the class, you'll get access to a free Q&A. You guys can go and sign up at taraswiger.com/pay. If you feel like you don't know your numbers enough, or you're not tracking your numbers or your profit and your loss or your profit margins, or you don't know how many products you need to make and sell in order to make the amount of money you want to make, Pay Yourself helps you with all that. So it's taraswiger.com/pay. So to answer your question, what I do is I think about the projects I'm working on, and then I shape the podcast around them to share it with you guys, so you guys know what's going on in my life, in my business, and so you can participate when it's the right thing. So for example, in October, I'm teaching 2 different workshops with Creative Live. I just signed the contract, and none of anything is on their website yet. I will tell you when it is, but I'm going to do a 1-day class on podcasting for your craft business and a 1-day class on YouTube for your craft business. Not tutorials to teach other people to craft, but if you sell a product, or you're a knitting designer, or you're an artist, how you can use YouTube videos and a YouTube channel to spread the goodness of your work. So those projects mean that I'll probably be talking more about podcasting and YouTubing here on the podcast as we get closer to that class, to both get you ready if you want to take that class and be a student in that class, but also to let you know that class is available there for you. So that is really how I think about Explore Your Enthusiasm. It doesn't have its own goals and timeline. It's more here to be a way for us to communicate, for me to answer your questions, and also for me to let you know the projects that are going on. So I have Pay Yourself is open right now, taraswiger.com/pay. The Starship is going to open again at the end of September. That's my online community for makers and artists. And then I have Creative Live in October. Then the Starship will open again in December. And then I'm teaching at Midwest Craft Con, and the tickets for that just went on sale. That's in March in Ohio. So if you're anywhere in the Midwest, this is the big thing I do each year in the Midwest, so Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois. I'm a native Ohioan, so I love Midwest Craft Con, and I like to meet all of you native Midwesterners as well. So that's what's coming up for me. I'm also growing my essential oil business all of the time, teaching workshops and traveling for that, going to the annual convention in September. But for Explore Your Enthusiasm, it's really just about making sure that each podcast answers the questions that you guys actually have and helps you where you are in your business, and also opens you up to other resources that are going to be helpful for your next steps. things like my books and my classes or workshops I'm teaching. So thank you guys so much for sending in your questions. I love answering your questions. Make sure you follow me on Instagram so the next time I post a Q&A post, you can be sure to ask your question. I'm at Tara Swiger. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like it on YouTube, leave a review on iTunes, and make sure you've subscribed on all the places. And if you've done all that, then share it with your friends, because when you share it, it lets me keep going and getting more ideas about what to post about next. Feel free to send me any ideas you have for the podcast anytime. I love getting your questions, and I so appreciate you for listening. Have a really enthusiastic day.